Okay, so this is a video for paper 3 of the AQA A-level Sociology exam, Crime and Deviance. So let's have a look at the basics then. So it's a 2-hour exam, just like your other paper 1 and 3. Again, it's worth 80 marks, but those 80 marks aren't evenly distributed between the sections. Crime and Deviance is worth 50 marks, and Theory and Methods is worth 30 marks. You can see on the slide, it gives you an indication of the suggested time frame for answering those questions. So 75 minutes for your crime and deviance and 45 minutes for your theory and methods. This paper counts for 33% of your overall mark, and I thought it was quite worthwhile just looking at the assessment objectives overall, not just on this paper. AO1 counts for 44%, AO2 31%, and AO3 25%. Now that's quite important to get your heads around, because that tells us that 44% of all of your marks from paper 1, 2 and 3 are up for grabs for your knowledge. Now, knowledge and understanding is your memory recall stuff. It's knowing your theories and concepts and studies, but that's only going to get you so far. 31 and 25% for your AO2 and AO3, so 56% is about what you do with your knowledge. So memory recall is only going to get you so far. You need to be able to apply the theories correctly, accurately, and in detail. You need to analyse those theories and debates and ideas and arguments. And you're going to have to really look at your evaluation skills too. So I always think it's really important to have a look at the paper itself. Familiarise yourself with the paper and the format, so it's not so daunting when you're in that exam hall. So as you can see, it's set out like this. So question 1, 4 marks, question 2, 6 marks. Then you've got your 10 marker, again with your item. Now that's exactly the same in terms of the rules that apply with answering that question as the paper 1 and paper 2. Then you'll have a 30 marker essay style question on crime, and then that completes your crime section. Then it's over to theory and methods, where you have a 10 marker, outline and explain 2. And then you have your last question, which is a 20 marker, and it's on theory or methods, or both. Obviously, they link. It's really important that you think about the order in which you're going to answer these questions. Now, you could just do it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I personally would do the big mark questions first, because in examiners' reports, it often reports back that students run out of time, and so the 20 marker on the theory and methods part of this exam is often left quite sparse. In other words, you run out of steam or you run out of time. Now, time management is something that you need to work on as students, because you should know after 2 years exactly the amount of time you've got. You've got 2 hours, it's 1.5 minutes per mark. And so in your revision time, practice, time yourself. That's the best way to sort of become better under pressure and writing under pressure. So let's have a look then. In the crime and deviance section, these are the types of questions you've got, and I've written down these suggestions for how long you should spend on them. So you've got your outline 2 and 3. So these are knowledge, as you can see, the AO breakdown. These are knowledge-based questions. Applying material from item A, analyse 2, appears on this paper as it did on paper 1 and paper 2. And again, 15 minutes. Applying material from item B and your knowledge evaluate is the essay style question. 45 minutes is the recommended time that you spend on that. In terms of the theory and methods section, outline and explain 2. So it's a 10 marker, but it's slightly different, and I'll explain, as I did in the other video, how you answer that differently to the item 10 marker. And then you've got an essay, apply material from item C and your knowledge evaluate. And again, 30 minutes worth, 30 minutes that you should spend on that. Now have a look at the AO breakdown for all of these questions, and familiarise yourself once more with what AO1, AO2 and AO3 actually stand for. So AO1 is your knowledge and understanding. So it's knowing your theories, knowing your concepts, being able to identify accurately knowledge about those theories. So who said what, who says the causes of crime are marginalisation, relative deprivation, leading to subcultures, or who links it more to biology, etc., etc. Know those theories. Feminism, Marxism, functionalism, neo-Marxism as well, you know, more contemporary versions of those theories. Know your forms of punishment, know the different types of state crime, different definitions. That's all of your AO1. So the best way to revise those sorts of things are make decent notes. So divide your notepad into sections where you've got your heading and your concepts, as well as the studies and the theories on one page. Alternatively, like you can see in the picture, get one of those kind of key ring hooks and do some flashcards. AO2 is application, so it's about, okay, I know these theories, but can I apply it to a debate? And we just don't know what questions are going to come up. So it's all very well knowing a functionalist approach, but can you apply that to punishment as well as to the causes of crime? And how detailed can you go in with those theories and understanding? Can you apply it to any situation? Can you apply the links between theories and ideas? And also, can you bring in any relevant examples, contemporary examples from the news, for instance, to explain what those theories are talking about? So if you talk about zero tolerance, do you know that, you know, New York, for instance, operates a zero tolerance policy and has done in the past? AO3, analysis and evaluation. So analysis is all about depth and relevance. It's about knowing that when I explain a functionalist explanation or a subcultural theory explanation, I'm going to do it in detail. So it's not about how many things you know, it's the detail and the depth to which you go in for your answers. So it's those rich in detail, rich in concepts, really unpacking concepts. So if you're looking at things like left realist examples of causes of crime, that you don't just say it's marginalisation, relative deprivation leading to subcultures. You unpack marginalisation and you unpack relative deprivation. And you can use the cage to do that, class, age, gender, ethnicity, but also know the theoretical sort of background and context. So know if it's a structural theory, if it's micro level, that those sorts of things will get you much better marks. And evaluation, don't neglect strengths. Most students are very quick to evaluate by way of criticism. Very few look at the strengths, and for the strengths you can always praise it, so it's raised awareness of something, it's highlighted something, but also if you can bring in a contemporary example and say it's relevant to today because you can see it in the news. So have a think about when you're revising those different theories or those different debates, can I bring in any contemporary details? And in terms of how to revise for AO2 and AO3, well, AO2, like I said in my last video, concept cards to look at the relevance and the links between different theories. Make sure you're on Twitter and follow the news so you can apply contemporary news events and stories. And for AO3, again, making tables, looking at the links, who's influenced who, looking at the details between different methods that have been used to explain these ideas, these causes of crime or whatever it is you're looking at. So table summaries are really useful. Let's just briefly have a quick look at this specification then, because it's really important that you know what you've got to revise. So for crime and deviance then, crime and deviance, social order and social control. So it's really, really important then that you look at those major theories. So what are the theories? What do they have to say? What are the causes? Major theories: feminism, functionalism, Marxism, postmodernist ideas. Look at social order and social control. Don't neglect those sort of more less well-known theories. So if you're looking at subcultural theory, of course learn the functionalist-based ones, but don't neglect ones like Miller's focal concerns, Marxist subcultural theories, that sort of thing, because that could help make your answer stand out. Feminism, functionalism, anime, strain theory, contemporary developments in theory like postmodernism, like I've said, all of those are really, really important. And be aware of when they were brought out, basically, because a lot of people just assume that all of these theories came about at the same time, and of course that's just simply not true. So look at the order in which they appear and use that to form your essays in a logical order. What about non-sociological theories? So things like psychological theories or biological theories. Now, of course, you don't need to know those in any real depth, but it will help inform some of your evaluation points, because you could always contrast them with sociological theories. Make sure that when you're looking at theories, you know who's been influential. So, for instance, if you're looking at Matz's Delinquency and Drift, know that Cohen has adapted some of those techniques of neutralization when he looks at the culture of denial for state crime. And that's just really important, because it, again, helps you gain those AO2 and AO3 assessment objective marks. Really important to know who does what and where. So looking at the social distribution of crime. So it says by ethnicity, gender, class, but also location, I think is really important. So I would ensure that I covered that if I was taking this exam. And know the patterns. Make sure you can explain the patterns and trends. So knowing CAGE, basically. So by class, who is likely to offend. And again, be able to explain it with theory, so that your topic 1 stuff comes in here. So not just Marxism to explain class differences. What about strain theory in explaining class differences, or labelling theory, or subcultural theory? With age, make sure you can understand why young people commit more crime than older people, bringing in subcultural theory perhaps. Gender, obviously looking at why men commit more crime than women, or appear to commit more crime than women. Ethnicity, so looking at ethnic minority rates of offending, as well as victimization. Location, like I said earlier, is important. So just having a basic awareness of theories like Chicago School is always a handy sort of thing to have knowledge of in this exam. And with the social distribution of crime, that just means CAGE, basically. So if that comes up in an exam question, that's what they're looking for, the social distribution, so the class, age, gender, ethnicity. But also with social distribution, how do we even know these patterns? So where do we get them from? How do we measure crime? So official crime statistics, victim surveys, self-report studies, know your strengths and weaknesses. Which theories would say they're useful and take these patterns at face value? So official crime stats at face value. So the likes of functionalism, subcultural theory, these are all theories that take these statistics at face value. Contrasting that, of course, with labelling theory, then you have yourself a theory which says that these measurements are socially constructed. These statistics are socially constructed. So it's getting that debate between social fact or socially constructed methods. Remember, it's not just about the social distribution of offenders, it's also about victims. And obviously you've got that in your last chapter, but it's worth noting what victims are out there by CAGE, and debates that come across as a result of those patterns and trends. So policing, patterns of policing, stop and searches, and types of crimes that people are victims of. For instance, racist incidences and those sorts of things. So that's really important. Moving on then, impact of globalization. Globalization is a major theme that runs throughout this course, so make sure you understand what it is. And make sure you understand how it's had an impact on crime. So the impact, for instance, on the nature of crime. So has it produced new types of crime, old types of crime done on a different medium? New or old victims, so we could look at the victims of crime now from globalization, for instance, with green crimes. Has that become a bigger problem? Is there this victim pattern in green crime, so environmental racism, if you like. So less economically developed countries tend to be more the victims of green crimes than more economically developed countries, who are usually the perpetrators of these green crimes. We call that environmental racism. Looking at, okay, that's the nature of crime that's been changed. What about the impact globalization has had on the extent? So has crime gone up or gone down? And not just assuming it's gone up, because look at the impact globalization has had on the ability to prevent and control crime. So looking at those things like surveillance, how we've become much more interconnected as a globe, and surveillance, has that helped or has it hindered? So looking at new forms of punishment, new forms of prevention, and how, the issues that come out of that. How do we police global crime? It's something that surpasses areas of jurisdiction. So how do we police that? This is also about media and the media's relationship with crime. So not just knowing, does it cause crime, because we all are quite happy with understanding the media's relationship in causing crime, so copycat crime, those sorts of things, making sure that you know case studies for that. But also, is it a vehicle, a driving force? Is the media a driving force for encouraging new types of crime? Not just copycat crime, but things like moral panics. And do moral panics even count now? Or have we become normalised to moral panics? Creating cultural inclusion and economic exclusion. What about that? The media advertising all these products and people having unequal access to money to be able to afford certain products. So cultural inclusion, however, economic exclusion. Looking at how the media perhaps creates labelling of certain people. So lots on the causes, but look at the news values, try and bring in contemporary examples. What does the media represent in terms of of crime and deviance? Does it tend to only focus on extraordinary crimes? Or and how does that really relate to official crime statistics in the picture we see in that? Does it conflict, or does it relate and sort of mimic it? Before we get on to the last bullet point, I've just noticed I haven't looked at human rights and state crime, and state crime is really important. There's lots on it as well, so making sure that you know the definitions of the different types of state crime, and making sure that you know it's not corporate crime and it's not powerful crime. There is state corporate crime, of course, but this is, as a section, something you need to be able to explain in detail, bring in theories that specifically relate to state crime. Know the different types, know how it impacts and creates debates about whether we should extend our analysis, transgress our understanding of crime to include human rights or harms. And that's really something that I think students tend to be scared of. But if you have a look and you plan, peel paragraphs of those different explanations and definitions, you'll be absolutely fine. The last bullet point looks at control, surveillance, prevention and punishment and victims, and the role of the criminal justice system and other agencies. So make sure you know the criminal justice system and the different agencies that operate within. I think, looking at debates about whether the criminal justice system works. So do prisons work? Are the police fair in how they police? Make sure that, there's links to topic 1 here. So theories, what's the theoretical position of, say, Marxism or functionalism on the role of punishment, the role of policing? Who gives us these prevention strategies? So looking at left realist ideas on how to prevent crime. Look at right realist approaches on crime prevention. Making sure you know the strengths and weaknesses and the problems that we have. So looking at, say, environmental crime prevention strategies and knowing that it may cause displacement, and really knowing that there's different types of displacement, not just calling it displacement. With punishment, knowing Foucault as well. So obviously you can apply functionalism and Marxism, but look at Foucault's ideas on the panopticon and how that's influenced our ideas on surveillance today. Looking at those new contemporary examples of surveillance assemblages, etc. So those new types of surveillance systems that are at play. Look at the issues that come out from this bullet point. You've got surveillance, so you've got issues of, do we live in a surveillance society? You've got punishment and prevention, so issues and debates that come out of that. Do prisons work? Do we live in an age of mass incarceration? And with victims, making sure you know the patterns, like I said earlier, and also how is it that we should go about in terms of studying victims? How is best to study victims? Then, obviously, that's all the crime and deviance stuff in a nutshell, but have a look at theory and methods. And to be honest, there is quite a big overlap with year one. So you know your main methods by now, and you know your types of data. You should know quantitative versus qualitative. You should know the main methods as well as some smaller methods. So make sure you know, obviously, your observations, interviews, questionnaires, social surveys, observations, but know the variations, structured, or unstructured. Making sure that you know some of those smaller types of methods. So things like, well, not necessarily smaller, but not as well known usually by students. So longitudinal studies, content analysis, because they could come in, personal life accounts, so autobiographies, and those just so smaller case studies that perhaps those methods like case studies that you might not think to revise. And the best way to revise is using PERVERT, so practical, ethical and theoretical strengths and weaknesses, never forgetting that you've got to bring in those key concepts of validity, reliability, bring in examples to support if you're talking about a particular strength or weakness. Make sure, whatever you do, that you know the difference between validity and reliability, because year after year students get it wrong, and it's not very good because it shows that your knowledge is lacking. So I always remember R for reliability, R for repeat, and validity true to life. Factors affecting choice of topic as well as method. That could come up as a 10 marker as well, and I think that's something that people neglect. So what factors affect a sociologist's choice of topic, so what they research, as well as a method. Theories you need to know in much more detail now, so you should have in your lessons looked at how do functionalists, Marxists, neo-Marxists, action theory, any of those conflict theories, how do they approach an understanding of society? How do they see the world? What's important to them? What do they research? How do they use their research? And what methods do they use? So there's some key theories and debates that come out of that. So is the best way to study and understand society through a structural understanding or an action-based understanding? Consensus versus conflict. Should we be looking at modernist theories, or are they outdated versus postmodernist theories? Other debates that you would have looked at are things like, can we ever, as sociologists, be value-free, or inevitably do values creep into our research? Is sociology a science? Can it be? Should it be? And should we get involved in social policy making? So make sure that you are happy that you've planned a key sort of plan of attack for those debates and those theories, because they're bound to come up in some way, shape or form. So let's have a look at the first types of questions then. Let's have a quick look at outline 2 and outline 3. These are nice and straightforward. You don't have to have an introduction. There's no conclusion. You just get on with it. So you are identifying a point. You're identifying a way, a reason, a trend, and you're explaining it. So just make sure that when you explain something that you've identified, that you explain how it's linked, how has it affected or caused whatever in the question. You're not just describing. So let's have a look at some examples. So it could be outlined to features, ways, characteristics, functions of something, factors affecting something, the effects of, I don't know, a policy or prevention strategy, to reasons why a pattern occurs, a trend occurs, problems with a theory when it's explaining the causes of crime, the advantages of something, the criticisms of a theory. So I thought I'd go through an example. So if this came up, one reason, outline 2 reasons for gender differences in offending. Then if that was the question, this is me putting the P structure into practice. So as you can see in red, that's where I've highlighted a point. So one reason for gender differences in offending, according to functionalist sex role theory, are differences in gender socialization. Then I have to explain it. And I have to explain it, and the best way to explain it is bring in examples. So in green you can see the examples and purple are the explanation. This is the idea from the likes of Parsons, who argues females are less likely to commit crime because they've been socialised into norms and values like passivity from a young age that are not conducive to committing crime, whereas boys have been socialised into values which are conducive to criminal behaviour, like aggression, competition, which could lead to fighting and theft, for example. Now, with outline 2 and outline 3, they are supposed to be quite short answers, 2 or 3 sentences at the most. Now, arguably, you don't need to put studies in these answers, but if you think about impression management, you are trying to show the examiner that you know your stuff. So if you know that sex role theory is a functionalist idea and you've got time, put it in. There is no harm in doing that. But just so you know, the outline 2 and 3, they aren't supposed to be massive essays. So please just spend about 2 or 3 sentences on these answers. Otherwise you are wasting time. And again, think about the order that you're going to do these. I would always do the 20 markers and the 30 markers first, and then when I've got time at the end, do these. And then if you have spare time, add in an extra one. So there's no harm if it says outline 2 in putting an extra one in, just in case some of your points are similar. And that's the key to success for outline 2 and 3. It's making sure each point is different. So if I've identified functionalist sex role and socialization, my second point must have nothing to do with socialization or functionalism. So maybe go for a feminist idea like control theory. So I hope that's helped just explain the P structure. Okay, so having looked at the nature of outline 2 and outline 3, I thought what I would do is give you a slide where you can test yourself and have a go at these. So I'll just put them up, and you can obviously pause the presentation to have a look to see which ones you would struggle with, which ones you would find quite easy. So outline 2, criticisms of environmental crime prevention strategies. Outline 2, reasons why prisons may not be considered to work to stop crime. Outline 2, reasons why ethnic minorities may be victims of crime. Outline 2, types of displacement. Outline 2, different types of surveillance measures. Outline 3, explanations of corporate crimes. Outline 3, reasons why we should study green crimes. Outline 3, definitions of state crimes. Outline 3, reasons why young people may commit crime. Outline 3, reasons why some people might join a deviant subculture. And outline 3, news values. So have a look at those, and in your own time, if you don't know how to answer those, look it up because it could come up. So things like outline 3, explanations of corporate crimes. Lots of people are quick to go to Marxism. That's fine, but if it's outline 3, what are the other 2 going to be? So have a look at that in your own time and prepare for the exam in case they come up. Next question is applying material from the item analysed to. Now, in the previous video for paper 2, I explained how I would do these sort of item questions, the 10 markers. So have a look back at that. But just in case you haven't listened to that video, no introduction is needed. Because it's asking you for 2 things, then spend 7.5 minutes per point. That way you give yourself maximum time to be able to answer fully those 2 factors, effects, whatever it's asking you for. First things first is read the question. Every question will link 2 things usually. So what's being linked? What are the 2 things you've got to talk about? Then look at the item and search for those hooks. You cannot get above 3 if you don't use the item. You need to use the item. There will be 2 hooks in the item, information that you can hook onto, develop and explain, and then go on to evaluate. So your first sentence should be item A states Don't copy chunks of writing, just a few words. And then proceed to do your peel paragraph, where you take that point, you explain it, you unpack it, you bring in lots of explanation, lots of examples to explain whatever is being asked in that question. Make sure everything is linked. Don't story tell and describe loads and loads of case studies or contemporary examples if it's not relevant. Make sure everything that you're taking your time to unpack is going to get you marks. So it's answering the question. And so your chain of reasoning has to be in detail to hit those AO2 and AO3 marks. So I use this hand just to help me revise these 10 markers, or I would if I was taking the exam. Making sure, first things first, you use the item twice. So many students use the item in the first point, then get carried away and think, oh yeah, I know another reason for this, and just carry on writing. Well, you cannot afford to do that. If you want to get into the 8 to 10s, you need to use it twice. How are you going to have a detailed chain of reasoning? Try and link the causes or the effects to a theory. Can you use theory to explain something? Unpack concepts. Use studies that are relevant and evaluate strengths and weaknesses. So let's have a look at this one then. Applying material from item A, analyse 2 reasons why globalisation may lead to an increase in crime. Now, you can see in the green, I've tried to show and demonstrate how they have taken 2 things to join together here. So the first thing is globalisation, and the second thing you've got to link globalisation to is an increase in crime. So you're not describing crime, you're trying to link globalisation, the fact that we live in a globalised world, how has that had an impact of increasing crime? So it's worth 10 marks. You've got to read the item and think, what am I expecting to see in this item? So have a look at the item. There's lots of things that I can see that could be useful here. So there's more than 2 hooks, I believe, but have a look. First of all, you could look at the interconnectedness, the increasing interconnectedness. You can link it to the internet and communication technology. But instead of just explaining and describing cybercrimes and things like that, you've got to unpack why it is that we are increasingly interconnected, how that has had an impact of increasing crime. And of course use cybercrime as examples, but don't neglect the explanation of it. Then you've got obviously deregulation of financial markets that you could link to types of crime that have come out as a result. But again, what is it about deregulating financial markets that has facilitated an increase, encouraged an increase in crime? The availability of cheap air travel, movement of people, how can that increase crime? And the last hook, increase in inequality. So an impact of globalization is that it's increased inequality between rich and poor countries. So thinking about what theory that you can apply to explaining that in terms of how it's had an impact in crime. So if there's inequality between rich and poor countries, what kinds of crime have increased as a result and why? So here is an example of a student's answer. I'll just pause for a second so you can read it, and then I want you to think what you would give it out of 10, whether it's a good answer, a medium answer, or a brilliant answer. Okay, so if that's not long enough, just pause now. Overall, this is too limited. This is too brief, far too brief to get the top band for AO2 and AO3. And what you see is the first reason, one reason for increase in globalization as implied by item A, that's good, they've made use to reference the item explicitly, is the internet, so that's good. But then this enables criminals to communicate across national boundaries. So we've got an indication, a hint at the impact of the internet. And that's where it stops, because then all this person does is describe the type of crime that comes out of it. They haven't explained how globalization has caused it. So the internet can lead to the beginning of newly developed crimes such as cybercrime scams. Beck states globalization has created new fears in global society and new risk consciousness. So that's not really linked to cybercrimes, it's just sort of added on. It's an attempt at theory, but it's not really doing much. This is emphasized by the media, which exaggerates dangers, e.g. the rise of terrorism. So you really need to look at what's caused crime to increase. What is it about globalization? And they've hinted here, but they haven't really developed it. Here's their second point. Again, crimes in this second point really need to be explained in so much as how far have they really produced an increase in crime. It's just, again, very, very brief and limited. So overall, this would pushes it into, because they've used theory, probably pushes it into the 4 to 7, but at the bottom. So we're looking at a 4 out of 10 for this. Okay, let's move on to looking at the essay style questions then. Applying material from item B and your knowledge evaluate. Again, it needs to be structured. It's an essay, so read the question twice, read the item, think about what you're going to use from the item, and then have an essay structure in your head to use. So for an introduction, I always tell my kids to use a DAD introduction. D stands for define, so define any key term or a debate, and then go on to say who agrees and who disagrees. Again, you could use one of those Ds for define to define whether or not whatever's being asked is easy to measure. Is it hard to define? Because that is worth sort of bringing in that critical element into your essays from the word from the get-go. Then your main is going to be constructed of a series of peel paragraphs. Now, loads of kids always ask me, how many paragraphs do I have to do? Well, it's really a difficult question because it can vary. And it's not about, right, okay, I've done 7 paragraphs, I'm going to get into the top band. Because actually, it's about the detail in which you go into. So I would rather my students talk about 3, 4 main paragraphs in lots of detail than 7 in very brief detail. So think about your chain of reasoning. And obviously you need to have a conclusion. Now the conclusion should not be a surprise to the examiner. You should be hinting at that conclusion throughout. In fact, in your introduction, you should hint at what you're going to conclude. And if you're going to use postmodernism or something like that, to say that we can't look at one thing, we need to look at a range of things. So that could be in terms of social distribution, it could be a theory. Then bring in people like Lyotard who talk about the death of meta-narratives. Now, in terms of how do I build in evaluation, I use these sort of questions. If I've got to evaluate, and that's really important to do this throughout your essay, not at the end when you might run out of time, do it throughout. Think to yourself, cage, class, age, gender, ethnicity. If in doubt, cage it. So is what you've just explained applicable to all of those groups? Is it outdated? Is it still relevant? So if it's a moral panic question, would you say that the whole concept of moral panics is outdated, given that we live in a media-saturated society where we're bombarded with panic stories all the time? Has it become normalised? What are the alternatives to what you're explaining? So what would functionists say? What would postmodernists say? What would feminists say? Is it Eurocentric? And what part has globalization had to play in it? Has that given you any indication of a criticism or a strength that you could write about? And the methodology is a really important one because theory doesn't exist without methods. So how has this person arrived at their idea? What methods have they used? Is it quantitative, qualitative? And how could we use that as a criticism or a strength? Is anything hard to define? Is anything hard to measure? Let's have a look at these ones then. So again, they always try to link two areas together. So apply material from item B and your knowledge, evaluate Marxist approaches to understanding crime and punishment. Now I've put this up here because lots of students will miss out marks because they'll read it quickly and just give me an essay about Marxist approaches to understanding the causes of crime. But it says understanding crime, but also punishment. So you need to make sure that you explain everything in the question. So a Marxist approach on punishment is crucial if you want to get into the top band. Apply material from item B and your own knowledge. Evaluate the impact of an increase in surveillance on preventing crime. So again, you're looking at the impact, you're looking at surveillance, and you're looking at how it could prevent crime. But you've got to evaluate it. So has it impacted positively in preventing crime or negatively in preventing crime? Apply material from item B and your own knowledge. Evaluate the usefulness of official crime statistics in understanding patterns of crime in society. So again, usefulness. Is it useful? Is it not useful? Strengths and weaknesses of official crime statistics. So what do they say? Are they social facts or are they socially constructed? And patterns of crime today in society today in terms of crime. So making sure you understand and be aware of what official crime stats actually do reveal. Lastly, apply material from item B and your knowledge. Evaluate sociological approaches to understanding class differences in crime and victimisation. Now, a lot of students might be worried when they see sociological approaches instead of theories. It's the same thing. To understanding class differences in crime, again, there's two things, crime and victimisation. So devote equal amounts of time to both parts of this question. Now, I know you haven't got the items for these questions, but it's always a good idea to see what in the essay that you could plan and just pretend that obviously that you've got an item and link it in some way to a fake item. But just planning these kinds of essays might be worthwhile. That's your crime stuff done. Now it's on to looking at outline and explain 2. So it could be for theory and methods, outline and explain 2 reasons, 2 arguments, 2 factors, problems, strengths, criticisms, ways. If it is a method, then make sure you use pervert, but it could be very specific and it could say outline and explain 2 practical strengths, 2 ethical weaknesses, 2 theoretical strengths related to a method. So with these outline and explain 2, read the question, what 2 things are being linked. You don't need an introduction, and the specification states that you don't need to evaluate. However, I always tell my students to do at least a however at the end. And that's simply because by looking at the significance of something, it sometimes can help you hit those AO2 and AO3 analysis marks. Make sure you're linking back to the connections in the questions. Make sure that everything you're writing is explaining the outcome of the question. Let's have a look at this one then. Outline and explain 2 reasons why sociologists may not influence government policy. Now here you can pause the video, but I'm not going to pause for too long because it's going to increase the time. So pause now and have a read of this student's answer. You can see that when you've read this, it's really written in a critical style. They've built in or attempted theory, and there's lots of good examples to explain the points that they are making. And so for this answer, this would definitely be an 8 to 10, a top band. So I've attempted to underline the hints of theory, but you can always print this out as a PowerPoint and try to do AO1, AO2 and AO3 annotations on it if you can. Applying material from item C and your knowledge evaluate. So this is your final essay, and like I said, in examiners' reports, lots of times reports come back that the students lose steam by this point. So time management is everything. So make sure you stick to your times. With this question, read the question twice. Make sure you're answering the question set, not the one that you think has been set. Look at the item, think about how you're going to use the item. And again, it's an essay, so it's an introduction, a main, and a conclusion. So the main's going to be full of peel paragraphs, maybe 5 to 6, but again, it can vary. It's really hard to say how many paragraphs are needed for that particular question, and that could really differ. So let's have a go. Let's have a look at this one then. Apply material from item C and your knowledge. Evaluate the sociological assumptions that sociological research can never be value free. Now, I think this might come up, values and value freedom. So make sure you know the arguments for and against. Who would argue that sociology can operate in a value free way, and which ones would argue that no, it's impossible and it's not desirable. Apply material from item C and your knowledge. Evaluate sociological explanations which suggest sociologists should not be and cannot be involved in social policy making. Again, there are two parts to this: should not be and cannot be. So make sure you know people that say they shouldn't be, and those that would say, well, even if we wanted to and it's desirable, it's doubtful that we could ever get involved in social policy making. Applying material from item C in your knowledge, evaluate structuralist understandings of society. So making sure that you understand which theories are structuralists, and it's understanding society. So make sure you draw on synoptic links between year 1 and year 2. So if you're outlining a structuralist like Marxism or functionalism, and you're trying to explain how they understand society, there's loads of links between religion that you can get in, families and education, media, lots and lots of synoptic links, and that will be rewarded. Apply material from item C and your knowledge. Evaluate the assumption that we now live in a postmodern era and that modernist theories have become outdated. Again, postmodernism is a topic area that a lot of students hate or fear, but it really isn't that scary. You just need to read different materials. Don't just stick to one textbook. Have a look to see if there are any materials online, revision materials, to break down those concepts. So, do we live in a postmodern era? And if not, do we live in a postmodern era? And if not, can we just stick to those modernist theories, or have they become outdated? Looking at terms like late modernity, in a later phase of modernity, is a nice in-between a harsh yes or no. So that concludes the video. I hope that's been helpful. And the last thing that I need to say to you all is good luck. Don't panic. Read the question twice. And don't waste time. Use your time management skills. Thank you.